Hey everybody, good evening. Hope you guys are having a great evening so far. It's right at 8:30 and I'm going to go ahead and get started. I hope some of you can hop on live. If not, the recording will stay up. So tonight's class is on reading nutrition labels and what the basics are. This is going to be about knowing exactly what you put into your body, why that is so important, and how you can really up-level your health by knowing, again, exactly what you're putting into your body. So the first part of this I want to talk about is why care? Like, why should you even care about this? Well, reading nutrition labels, I think, is key to shifting your health in a positive direction, shifting your health in the right direction. You know, we really want to fuel our bodies with the good stuff, right? The stuff that gives us energy and vitality and helps us to be able to do the things that we want to do on a daily basis. And we want to really get rid of, all of the junk, all of the icky chemicals, preservatives, toxins, and just get rid of that stuff that leads to disease, that slows our body down. And knowing how to really read labels very well is key to knowing, again, exactly what you're putting into your body so that you can choose the good stuff and leave the junk on the shelf. So labels can be super deceiving. I'm sure many of you probably know that. If you probably, I would say 8 to 10 years ago, I was at the point as well when I would go into the grocery store, I would think, okay, what am I? I would look at the label and I would think, okay, well, it has this amount of calories or this amount of fat or this amount of protein. Is this good? Is this not good? What should I really be looking for? And it's so easy just to get hey Rochelle, it's so easy just to get very distracted and overwhelmed and just not really know where to go. So I hope that tonight, or after tonight, this will really break it down for you and help you be able to kind of get in the grocery store and get out quickly. So that's kind of what I want to focus on tonight. This is going to be basics. So where do you even start? You're in the grocery store, you're trying to make good choices for your family, but it's so overwhelming. So I think with just a few simple tips, it will get a lot easier, a little bit of practice, and it will get a lot easier. The goal is to get in the grocery store and come out with your sanity, right? Sanity intact. So the key really is to have a game plan when you go in. And I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But to have a game plan, to know exactly what you're looking for so that you can just scan the labels on the food very quickly. And again, get the good stuff and leave the junk behind. So I'm going to go through first the components of a nutrition label, what each of them mean, why they're important, why they're maybe not so important, and what you really need to focus on. So the first thing you'll see on a nutrition label is the serving size. I hope if you guys can see me, can you give a thumbs up? Some people are saying they're having problems with connection. You may need to turn your Wi-Fi off if you're having a problem with connection. That's what I usually end up having to do, is turn my Wi-Fi off. But I'm going to keep going because the video will save. Okay, good. I got a thumbs up there from somebody. All right, so serving size. Serving size is really important. I used to never look at this, but it can be super deceiving. Like if the front of a package says it has 100 calories, well, that's 100 calories per serving. So you really have to look at what's in a serving. If there are 6 chips in a serving, and you eat, 30 chips, then, you've kind of gone a little bit overboard and you have to multiply the amount of calories or fat or whatever it is you're most concerned about and looking at by the amount of servings you ate, right? I actually just did this. It was just a couple of days ago on accident. I usually always look at the serving size now, but I was eating some tuna. Just to give you an example, I just did this 2 days ago. I usually buy tuna in like those little pouches. They're kind of like vacuum sealed, and there's one serving in the ones that I buy. And so I bought some canned tuna that was a different brand that I wanted to try. And I didn't even look at it. I just, took the tuna out. And once I started flaking it apart, I thought, gosh, there's a lot of tuna in here. But I don't really think anything about it. So I ate the tuna, and that's all I ate. And afterwards, I thought, God, that was really a lot of tuna. Let me go back and look at that can. It was 2.5 servings. So yeah, I ate 2.5 servings, which is not a horrible thing, but I probably didn't need 2.5 servings of tuna at that time. So again, super important. Always look at the serving size. The next thing on the nutrition label is calories. Now, I don't count calories. I'm not saying I never look at calories, but calories can be very deceiving. I think that it's important to count calories if you are someone who is looking to lose a lot of weight. Of course, you can't consume, 5,000 calories in a day and not be active, super active, and expect to lose weight. But if you're really trying to just kind of maintain a healthy weight and you eat healthy, nutritious foods, you really don't have to count calories. And so once you get to that point, the awesome thing is you won't have to worry about counting calories. Now, calories vary, the amount that you need vary based on a couple of different things. It's based on age, gender, and activity level. So, there's tons of different calorie counters and all that, and I'm not going to talk about all that, but just know that, that's something you might want to focus more on if you're trying to lose weight. But the reason that I find that it's not super important to count calories is, number one, it's no fun. I mean, who wants to, sit there and count calories all day? I can't eat this, I can't eat that. That's number one. Number two is, it's really just best to stop eating when you feel full or when you feel satisfied. It's best to just stop then, push the plate back, or, don't put, too much on your plate to begin with, right? Then worry about just counting, calories. And then the third reason that I don't really like to look at calories that much is because not all calories are created equal, right? And I want to give you an example so you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is typically the first area, though, that people their eyes are drawn to. I think over time, we've just been kind of programmed to, how many calories does that have in it? But here's one reason why, again, I don't think it's super important because they're not all created equal. Take an avocado, okay? An avocado has roughly about 320 calories in a medium-sized avocado. We know avocados are super healthy for you. They have great fats in them, healthy fats in them. They have fiber in them. So take the avocado, and then let's take a chocolate-covered donut. Chocolate-covered glazed donut at Dunkin' Donuts has about 340 calories. So roughly right about the same as an avocado. Now, if I was someone who was just counting calories, and I like to eat foods like donuts, I might say, well, gosh, this donut has the same calories as this avocado. I'll just eat the donut. So you get my point, right? That all calories are not created equal. What we want are to consume calories that are nutrient dense, to consume foods that are nutrient dense. That's where we want to get our calories from. That's what's most important. But let me go back to the example of the avocado and the donut. So a couple other facts about those two, like if you were just comparing. An avocado has about 20 grams of fat, which is good, healthy fat. A donut has about 17 grams of fat, which is trans fat, which is very, very bad for you. And I'm going to talk about that next. As far as sugar is concerned, the donut has about 17 grams of sugar, whereas the avocado has 1 gram of naturally occurring sugar. So obviously we all know that avocados are healthier than donuts, but I wanted to kind of use that as a comparison as to why not to just look at calories, okay? So we want, again, to fuel our bodies with nutrient-dense food, not low-calorie garbage, basically, okay? So the next component after calories on the nutrition label is fat. Now, this is another one that people can sometimes get hung up on and not really understand what the different types of fat are and, what's good and what's not good. Now, we don't need to avoid fat. You know, over the last decade or so, people are really coming around more now and understanding that fat is not the enemy, the right type of fat. We don't need to avoid it. It's super important for things like maintaining healthy cholesterol levels, and it actually, the good fats help to decrease inflammation in your body. So we do need good, healthy fats. That is important. The types of fats, I want to go over the 3 types and tell you which ones to avoid and which ones that we really need to focus in on. I think some people are still having problems with the class playing. You may want to turn off, I said this earlier, but you need to probably turn off your Wi-Fi if you're having an issue, because that's usually what I have to do. Sometimes with the connection, you have to shut off your Wi-Fi when you're listening. So 3 types of fats. Number 1 is trans fat. Okay, trans fat is totally bad for us. We don't want any trans fat. Your goal should be to have 0 trans fat. Trans fat is what comes from processed foods, baked goods. It's of absolute no benefit to our body, so we want to avoid that type of fat at all cost. Now, processed baked goods, so that kind of lets you know where the trans fats typically lie. Now, this can be very deceiving on a food label, and I'll tell you why in just a minute, but keep trans fats in mind. The next type is saturated fat. Saturated fat is okay in moderation, or in smaller amounts, I should say. You really should have no more than 20 grams of saturated fat per day. Okay, saturated fat comes from things like meat products and dairy. So it typically comes from animal products in general. But a little bit's okay, but again, less than 20 grams should be your goal. And then the other fat that you want the most of in your diet is going to be monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. These are going to be things like fats that come from avocado, from olive oil, from nuts, from fish, things like that. That's where you want to get most of your healthy fats from. Coconut oil, all of those are very good, healthy fats. Now, when you look at the labels, let's talk about how it's broken down on the label. There's a total fat, and then it will break it down into trans fats and also saturated fats, okay? So, trans fats, like I said, we want to avoid, because what happens, those are man-made, they're artificial junk, basically. Once they get into your bloodstream, into your arteries, they actually stay there. They actually stick to your blood vessels, and they are not removed. So they're like there permanently. They're like glue. Think of them like glue. And that's what leads to heart disease. It also turns on inflammation in your body, which leads to lots of different chronic diseases, diabetes, cancer, lots of different chronic diseases. Now, this is what's so disturbing to me, is that trans fats are actually, if you look at a label and it says 0 trans fats, that's what you want to look for, right? 0 trans fats. You see that on the label, you think, I'm good, this doesn't have any trans fats. Maybe not. Maybe not. There can actually be a 20% margin of error on the nutrition label allowed by the FDA, 20% margin of error that a packaged food can have up to 0.5 grams of trans fats per serving and still be labeled 0, because there's that 20% margin of error that is allowed by the FDA, okay? So now you're thinking, because this used to confuse me all the time. Now you're thinking, well, I mean, how am I even going to know if there's trans fats in it, right? This is how you know. You have to look at the ingredient label, okay? In the ingredient label, you will see either something that says, or if you see something that says hydrogenated oil, partially hydrogenated oil, or shortening. Those are the 3 key words to look for. If you see that in the ingredient label, even if it says 0 trans fats, it still has trans fats in it. Put it back on the shelf. And this is what used to confuse me so much, because I knew, until I started kind of studying it and reading more about it, I knew that hydrogenated oil was a trans fat. And so I would see that in the ingredient list of, I'll give you a good example, Jif peanut butter. If you look at Jif peanut butter, it has hydrogenated oil in it, but it says that it has 0 trans fat. And I used to look at that and I would think, well, why does it say 0 trans fat? That's why, because there is a 20% margin of error allowed. So that's how we are often deceived. You know, innocently, we're trying to make good choices for us, for our family, but we're being deceived in that way. Now, you might think, okay, 0.5 grams per serving. I mean, that's not that big of a deal, right? Well, that adds up. I mean, take the peanut butter, for instance. If you eat peanut butter every day, or if you eat a couple of servings every day, that can really add up. And remember, the trans fat is something that your body cannot process it. It cannot get rid of it. So again, avoid at all costs. So you have to really be a really, really good detective and look in that ingredient list for partially hydrogenated oil, or shortening. That's what you want to look for. If you see that, it's got trans fats in it, so put it back on the shelf. Okay. Sorry, that's kind of my soapbox. It really makes me mad that we get deceived like that. The next component of the nutrition label is cholesterol. Now, cholesterol, again, our bodies need a certain amount of cholesterol. We need it for hormone function. We need it for brain health. So it's not something that we want to avoid at all costs. We just want to limit it. Ideally, you want less than 300 milligrams per day. If that's something that you're looking at and that you're watching because maybe you've had some health issues, it's less than 300 milligrams per day is what you want to shoot for. And I must mention here, you've probably heard me mention before that if this is something that you want to calculate, you're not sure exactly how much you're getting of these different components per day, get an app for your phone like MyFitnessPal. That's my favorite one. Log your food in for a couple of weeks, and if you're kind of eating, a pretty much regular diet, I mean, you're eating similar things, throughout the week, you could do it for a couple of weeks, and then you would get a really good idea of how many, if you're looking at calories, how many calories you're taking in, how much fat, how much of it is saturated, how much of it is monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, how much cholesterol you're having. So it's really good at kind of giving you an idea of where you need work and where you can cut back, and need to make some modifications. Okay, the next thing that is kind of another little bit of a soapbox of mine, is carbs. It bothers me that people get really hung up on carbs. Carbs are not bad. The right kind of carbs are not bad. Carbs are actually the #1 source of energy for our bodies. Carbs are how our bodies get energy, how our cells get energy to do the things that we need to do to have the energy to function the way that we need to function throughout the day. We just simply need to choose the right carbs. That's what is key. So there are 2 types of carbs that we need to look at. The first one is processed carbs. These are simple carbs. What that means is these are carbohydrates that are used up by our body very quickly. They spike our blood sugar and they leave us feeling hungry and not satisfied after we eat them. This would be in things like donuts, cakes, cookies. Anytime you look at a label and it has enriched wheat flour or enriched white flour, that's a simple carb. It's going to spike your blood sugar. It's going to leave you hungry. It's not going to satisfy you. So that's one type of carbs. The second is a whole grain or a complex carb, and that's what you want. Most of the products, or ideally all of the products that you're buying, is to have more of a whole grain and a complex carb. What that's going to do, number one, it has more fiber. And when there's fiber attached to it, it helps to regulate your blood sugar. So you're going to have this slow release of the carbs in your bloodstream, to give you, which turns into sugar, to fuel your body. So it's going to be a slow release over time, over hours. And so what that's going to do is that's going to stabilize your energy and also your appetite. So it's going to give you sustained energy, and it's going to satisfy you. It's going to help you not get so hungry. You know how it is when you have a simple carb, or what I find is, since I don't really eat that kind of stuff, anymore, I've gotten away from that. But if my kids ever have something like, say, a donut or cookie, then what happens is, they're all hyped up and, they've got all this energy and they're feeling good. And then 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer later, they just crash and they feel horrible and they're starving and they're irritable. That's because it was nothing but simple carbs that spiked their sugar, left them hungry. So that's you can really see that in action if you, or feel it, if you eat stuff like that. So that's what's going on. So this is another reason, when we're talking about carbs, this is another reason that reading the ingredient label is super important. I mentioned just a minute ago about enriched wheat or white flour. Okay, this is kind of a whole nother topic in looking at the different types of grains, and I'm going to do a future class on that. But what I want you to know right now is that if you look in that ingredient label, and you're looking at something that has flour or a grain in it, and it does not have the word whole there in front of it, if it does not have the word whole, then it is nothing but white refined flour. Even if it says wheat, it's nothing but white refined flour, which is a simple carb. So you don't want that. You want to only get the food that on the label, in the ingredients, it says whole wheat or whole grain. It has to have the word whole in front of it. And this is another way that the label, like not the ingredient label, but like the packaging, the front of the box can be super misleading, confusing, is because they can put whole grain on the front. And then you start looking at the ingredients and there really aren't any whole grains in it. So I'm not sure how that is allowed, but that and the term natural are two terms that can be, again, very, very misleading and deceiving. And you can be thinking, I've done this plenty of times, you can be thinking, I'm buying these, let's say, cheese crackers, and they're such a better option than these other cheese crackers I used to buy. And you think that you're doing so good and you're so happy and you're so proud of yourself. And then you get to looking at the ingredients and you're like, oh, this isn't as good as I thought it was. So again, being a detective, really looking for those key terms is what's really going to help you make the best choices, when you're in the grocery store. And the other thing about carbs is, when you're talking about, I talk to a lot of people who do the, no carb or low carb diet, which I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. If you're really looking to have some weight loss, you need to lose a significant amount of weight. The problem that I have with that is that it's not sustainable. Number one, like I said, we need carbs for energy. We need good carbs for energy. Number two, if you participate in those type of diets, then typically what happens, and maybe not, maybe you're someone who's had great success with that, and I think that's wonderful. But typically what I see happening is people do that for a month, 2 months maybe, and they have this great weight loss and it's awesome. But then when they go back to eating, carbs or the way that they used to eat, their weight comes back on because it's not sustainable. So I feel that it is much more important to make these slow changes and shifts over time. It's really daily habits, that lead to long-term progress. That's where you're really going to see the shift, and you're really going to see the long-term results and progress is with those simple changes, just one step at a time. Okay, off my soapbox. The next part of a nutrition label, the next thing to look at is sugar. Okay. This is, again, a whole nother class because sugar is so prevalent in almost all packaged foods. I mean, I just noticed one day I was looking at some beans, like just pinto beans, and they had sugar in them. Why on earth would you put sugar in just a plain can of pinto beans? Why? Is so that we will buy more and more, because sugar is addictive. And the food industry and the food scientists out there know that sugar is addictive, and that's why they put it in all of the food, so that we'll come back and we'll continue buying their products because it tastes so good, right? The awesome thing is, the good news is that you can change your taste buds over time. Believe me, I know I have been a sugar addict for a very long time, and I have finally, just, over the last several years, have really gotten that under control, let's just say. Not that I don't fail sometimes, I'm not saying that, but your taste buds do change. Now, if I eat anything with refined white sugar, it gives me an instant headache, and I just don't feel good. I feel sick. It's super sweet because I'm not used to that. I have slowly over time converted to more natural forms of sugar. Things like honey, maple syrup, coconut sugar in small amounts. So believe me, you think that you cannot beat this addiction. I promise you, you can. So when you're looking at sugar, there are two types and two things to look for on the label. One is a natural form of sugar. You're going to find this mostly in things that have fruit. So I mean real whole fruit and dairy. That's where your natural forms of sugar are going to come from, mainly fruit and dairy. Now, other forms of sugar that are added, I could probably name off 20 or 30 other forms of sugar, but probably the most common ones would be high fructose corn syrup. We all know about that. We all know it's bad. At least the media has done a good job at letting everyone know how bad high fructose corn syrup is. And companies have decided to remove that because consumers are looking for that. They're looking for that label, to avoid. So the industry has become very smart. They remove that. They just add other forms of sugar. So now they may just be labeled corn syrup. It may not say high fructose corn syrup. So they can put on the front of their label, no high fructose corn syrup. But they can still put corn syrup in the ingredient label, which is just as bad for you. So that's kind of the way that they're being sneaky and kind of getting around this. Other things, cane syrup, things like sucrose and fructose. There are tons of other names for sugar hiding in your food. So again, this is where you have to look at that ingredient label. You have to really become a detective and look for those key terms to see really what sugar may be hidden in that food. Now, in terms of how much sugar you should have per day. For women, the recommended daily allowance is less than 24 grams. Now, just to give you an idea, that translates to about 6 teaspoons, okay? That adds up very, very quickly. I promise you, if you use an app like MyFitnessPal, that adds up really, really quickly. So, and you can kind of see by doing that, by using an app like that, if you consume too much sugar, you'll be able to see the breakdown of what you're eating, where the sugar grams are actually coming in. Like maybe you eat, a lot of raisins. Well, even though that's a fruit, it's a dried fruit, still it's going to have a lot of sugar content in it. So even if it's a natural form of sugar, you still need to, limit it somewhat. For men, it's 36 grams or 9 teaspoons. And for kids, the data that's out there is a little bit inconsistent, but the most consistent data that I can find is by American Heart Association. Even though it's a little bit vague, they basically say kids age 2 to 18 require less than 25 grams. So essentially like what a female requires. So think 24, 25 or less. So that's about 6 teaspoons, like I said. But again, that adds up so quickly. My kids were wanting me to take them to Smoothie King the other day. And so we went in and I started looking at the nutrition profile, which I love, by the way, that a lot of stores and restaurants are doing that now. They're giving you the breakdown of the nutrition on there. And so I was looking at the ingredients, and I looked at the sugar grams, and this one smoothie that my daughter wanted has 76 grams of sugar in it. I mean, 76 grams, that's absurd. Now, yeah, some of it was from fruit, but no, not all of it. So we just had to say no to that. But that again, that's why you have to. I mean, that's like what, more than 3 days worth, almost 4 days worth of sugar, or I guess about 3 days. Sorry, I'm trying to do math in my head. I do have some good news though. By 2018, the food labels will change a little bit. Instead of just having total sugar, which is what we have now, the food labels will tell you how much total sugar is in the package, whatever you're looking at, in that food, and then it will have added sugars. So that way we're going to be able to discern how much is natural sugar, which again, that's, natural sugar is not bad. Again, you have to, make sure you're not consuming too much of it, but it will tell you natural sugars versus added sugars. So that is going to be super awesome. By 2018, all companies are required by the FDA to put that on their food label. So that's pretty cool. So that's one good thing that they've done. Okay, I'm going to be off the sugar topic now. The next thing to look at is fiber. If you're wanting to consume more fiber, fiber is good for things like digestion. It helps to control blood sugar, because remember I said if there is fiber, when we were talking about carbs, if there's fiber attached to it, then that helps to promote an even blood sugar control. That would be more of your complex carbohydrates. You want to consume about 25 to 35 grams of fiber, should kind of be your goal and what you're looking for. Now, looking at how much per serving, if a food has 3 grams or more per serving, that's considered high fiber. Okay, so if it's 3 grams or more, that's considered pretty good and fairly high in fiber for that one food. But again, 25 to 35 grams is what you want to shoot for in a day. The next thing to look at is salt or sodium content. Now, a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to this, but salt is hidden in everything, right? It adds up so quickly, especially in processed and packaged things. And even if you don't have any health problems such as high blood pressure, people with high blood pressure definitely need to limit their salt intake because their blood pressure is not going to be well controlled and will elevate if they eat things with too much salt in them. It's still really important to watch that and to limit that. If you eat too much, I know what happens to me if I eat too much salt. I don't really eat out a lot. So whenever we do go out to eat, because restaurants and such tend to put a lot of salt in their food, I will begin to have a headache. I feel like my eyes almost swell or have pressure behind them. Sometimes my hands will swell, and that's usually what happens if you eat too much salt. You'll have some swelling, your blood pressure might go up. So it's important to limit it. The recommended amount is 2,300 milligrams or less for an adult, 2,300 milligrams or less. Now, if you have high blood pressure, or if you're trying to do things to avoid high blood pressure, which limiting salt would be one, you want to stick to less than 1,500 milligrams. That would be your recommended daily allowance, in a day, in a 24-hour period, less than 1,500 milligrams. So look for the salt content. The next thing is protein. Protein is very important for muscle growth and repair. How much protein you need is going to be based on body weight. So the recommendation is for an adult, for you, and you have to, this goes by weight, so you have to multiply. What you would do is you would multiply 0.8, it's 0.8 grams for every pound. So you would multiply 0.8. So if you were 100 pounds, you would, the recommendation would be about 80 grams of protein per day. For kids, the recommendation is 1 to 1.5 grams per 2 pounds. I don't know why they do it that way, but that's the way they do it, okay? 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per 2 pounds for children. Now, of course, if you are super active, you're trying to build muscle, then you may increase those requirements, and you can, that's something that, you can, look up and decide how many you need, but you might want to up it based on your needs. But protein is definitely important. And that is one thing that I do often look at on the nutrition label, is how much protein is in a certain item that I'm looking at. Now, the next thing is that you'll see in the right-hand column of the nutrition label, out beside each of the different components, like, the calories, the carbs, everything we've talked about, is the percent daily value. I don't really pay a lot of attention to this, but I wanted to mention it so that you know what it means. The percentage daily value is basically how much is in one serving based on how much you need. Now, that's how much the FDA says you need, and it is based on a 2,000 calorie diet, okay? I don't need 2,000 calories a day, probably. I like to consume somewhere around 1,600 to 1,800 is personally for me. So I don't really pay much attention to those percentage daily values, but just FYI, if something says it is 20% or more of the recommended daily allowance or percent value, that's considered high. If it's 5% or less, that's considered low, okay? So if you're looking for something, like if you're looking at fiber or protein and you were looking for a high content, then, you would be looking for the percent daily value, for that number to be 20% or more, if that makes sense. I don't pay a lot of attention to that part of the label. Now, let's get down to the very most important item on the label. Items, I should say, on the label. Where my eyes go to first and foremost when I pick up a box of whatever it is I'm looking at is in the ingredients. That is hands down where you need to focus. And for most people, they don't know that. I mean, I used to be one of those people. I used to look at all of those, carbs and calories and fat and protein and really go, well, okay, is this good? Is this not good? I don't really know. The most important thing to look at on the box is the ingredient label. Now, you have to, as I said, be a label detective, because like I said, when we talk about the trans fats, it may say 0 trans fats, and then you look and you see hydrogenated oil. So you were being a good detective. You found out that the label was misleading you and that there were actually trans fats in that. So that's why looking at the label is super important. If I see unwanted ingredients such as the hydrogenated oils, or if I see something like enriched white flour, it's going to go back on the shelf, because that's not something that I want to purchase. And this is kind of also another thing I want to talk about, is you have to have standards of what's acceptable to you and what's not. And when you see something that's not acceptable to you, that doesn't meet your standard on the label, just put it back. Don't even waste your time. Don't even waste your time looking at anything else. Now, when somebody else makes your food, they have full control over what's in it, right? We don't have control over that. They made it, they prepared it, they have full control over it. But we have the ultimate power to decide whether or not we're going to purchase that food and bring it into our home, because I guarantee if you break down and buy it in the grocery store and you bring it home, even if maybe you bought it for your kids or maybe for your husband, it's probably going to be calling your name. If it's one of your weaknesses, it's going to be calling your name in the pantry at 9 o'clock at night, and you're going to go eat it, right? Even if they never ate it. Been there, done that hundreds of times. So my my kind of motto is, if I can avoid buying it at the store, then I'm good. Like, I know that if I bring it home, then there's no willpower left there. So, but I'm pretty okay about, okay, you know, I'm going to leave it at the store. But I want to explain to you a little bit more about sorry, I kind of got off track there, but I want to explain to you a little bit more about the ingredient list before I wrap up here. When you look at the ingredients on a food label are listed by weight. Okay, so the amount of items, the amount of ingredients, so the one that weighs the most is listed first, and then it goes in descending order, meaning that if sugar is the number one ingredient, that's what it's made mostly of. It's nothing but sugar. Okay, if it's enriched white flour, that's what it's made the most of, and then again it goes in descending order. Now, you want to hear another way that the food industry is super sneaky? Have you ever wondered, if you are a person who looks at ingredient label or the ingredients on a label, have you ever wondered why there might be 5 or 6 different forms of sugar in a particular product? Like, there might be corn syrup, there might be cane sugar, there might be just sugar, white refined sugar, there might be sucrose, fructose. The reason is so that they can put more sugar, because if they only used one form of sugar, then it might likely have to be the first item listed there because it would weigh the most. If they spread out the sugar in different forms, then it can be lower down on the ingredient list where we might not recognize it, or we might look at it and go, oh, well, it's number 10 on the ingredient list, so it probably doesn't have that much sugar in it. And then you keep reading, you know, and there's other forms of sugar there. So that's another way that we can be deceived by the food industry. Now, a couple of other things. When you look at the ingredients, my advice to you is to adopt a standard. Like I said, you need to have a standard, but when it comes to ingredients, not only specific ingredients you want to avoid at all costs, like hydrogenated oils, like high fructose corn syrup. You want to avoid those at all costs, then that's going to be your standard. You're not going to buy anything that has that in the ingredients list. But also, I would encourage you to adopt a standard of, I'm not going to buy a product that has more than, say, 8 ingredients listed or 10 ingredients listed. You know, the more ingredients listed there, the more processed that product is. Some people adopt a standard of 5 ingredients. The least amount of ingredients, the less processed that product is. Because when they're having to add all of those chemicals and preservatives, you know, it's just more processed. It's been highly processed. And a lot of times what they do with flour, if it says enriched white flour or wheat flour, they have basically taken the whole grain and stripped it down, removed all of the nutrients, and then had to put back in some of the nutrients in a man-made form, chemical form, to add some of the nutrients back in. And that's how those ingredient labels get so long. And that's what, you know, like I said, it's something that you just have to be really good at and know about. And it doesn't take long. You just start scanning, you see something you don't like and you know is not your standard, you put it back. And that's what I always tell my kids. They started looking at labels. They were actually learning in school. It wasn't something that I had taught them at this point. They were learning it in school, and they came home and they were learning about sugar and calories, and they would look at the labels on things. And one day my son had some chips and he said, "Mom, this has 0 grams of sugar in it." And, you know, I said, "Well, that's good. What, do you see the ingredient list on there?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Well, read it to me." Well, he couldn't pronounce half of the words on there. And so I said, that's what we really need to be looking at, because honestly, if you can't pronounce it, your body can't recognize it and doesn't know how to process it. So just kind of think about it like that. Okay, So let's see. I'm looking at my notes here. If anybody has any questions, please post in the comments. I just would like to say that this does not have to be overwhelming. With just a few simple changes, you can really make big shifts in your health and in your family's health. I do want to let you know what we have planned for some future classes. We're going to kind of break down things like the term all natural. What does that really mean? We're going to talk about things like multigrain, whole grain, wheat versus whole wheat, and what the difference is and why something you're buying you may think is super healthy and you're making a great choice, but there may be something hidden or something that you don't know that it's not the best choice. And again, these are things that I've learned over time and that I want to share with you guys so that it can hopefully help you. The other thing that we're planning to do is when we go through the future classes, if we're talking about snack foods, we'll talk about the most common snack foods and why some of the ingredients in there might not be so healthy. And then I'll also give you what a healthier version or alternative is. And honestly, this is stuff that I have basically tested out on my family over years' time, because this is really what I do. My kids might like, let's say, Oreos, and I might be looking for a healthier, better version. I might buy one brand and it's terrible and they won't eat it. And then I might try another. So this has been something that I've just done over time, and I want to share with you guys what, some good, tasty alternatives are. So I hope that this has been helpful to you guys. Please, like I said, post any comments or questions in the comment section, and I'll be happy to come back and answer those. This video will remain up on our page, but we'll also be uploading it to our YouTube channel, and there are other videos on there. We'll upload all of these to our YouTube channel, so you can go and watch it there as well. I hope you guys have a great rest of the evening. Bye.